Hello and welcome to the Bechdel Theatre podcast. I'm Pippa and I'm your host. Now, unfortunately, Beth isn't here this week with me to intro because she is ill, but never fear, she will pop up later in the episode. So, first of all, I go to chat to the famous Lauren Barri Holstein, live artist extraordinaire, and we chat about her new show, Notorious, which is on at the Barbican. For you to get like an idea of her work, I really recommend you head over to her website, which is thefamous.omg.com. And if you go to the section on her show Notorious, you can see a trailer for the show, which really gave me an idea of what the show was going to be before I saw it. And you'll kind of get the kind of visual references that we talk about in the interview, especially like the wigs and there's a dead octopus and stuff like that. So to kind of get a taste of it, if you have internet, if you have access to the internet, I suggest you head over there and watch the trailer so you can kind of get a visual idea of what the show was, because it was so beautifully aesthetic and visual. And I hope you enjoyed our interview. It was done in a cafe, so please bear with us for the background noise, but Lauren had such amazing things to say. So take a listen. I hope you enjoy. And afterwards, Beth does our hashtag Bring a Feminist Friend challenge, where she takes someone to go see some theatre shows, and then we talk about it from a feminist perspective afterwards. So stick around afterwards for that, and I hope you enjoy the episode. So first of all, thank you very much for joining me. I am here with Lauren Barri Holstein. If you'd like to say hello.
Hi everybody, thanks for having me.
No worries, thank you for joining me. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that you are the famous Lauren Barri Holstein.
Yes, I am.
How did that come about?
The famous, well, it developed during the tour of How to Become One, and it was kind of a way for me to give the show some more freedom and kind of create a persona which could sort of direct the show from within. So she was kind of a way of, she was a technique, she still is, and I think she functions in many ways, but the development came from that idea, that need to sort of really play with liveness in the work and keep it raw and in the moment, and that's kind of what she really does for me. And then of course she also really plays with the idea of what a post-feminist subject might look like, and kind of inhabits that and tears it apart at the same time. So she's really key to my work, all of my work in that way. And I think I came up with the idea because like the famous something, it's like a boat or like something that was not famous and not interesting. And I was like, perfect. I'll just claim it.
Yeah. I love things like that. We have loads of that in Brighton actually. There's loads of like little shops will be like the famous rock shop.
Yeah, right.
Is it the famous, like world famous? It's really good, just say who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you are currently at the Barbican with your new show, Notorious.
Yes.
But you are also touring as well. How has it been so far, and how is it landing in the Barbican?
Gosh, it's interesting. So we've been to Birmingham where we premiered at Fierce Festival, which was super fun. I think the show's developed hugely since then. I think it found its feet at the Barbican. It was like me trying it on in Birmingham. I had to kind of feel it out, figure out where I fit into it a bit more, and
especially within like a festival context as well.
Yeah, I think for me it was more about the show itself. It's a very technical show, which for me is a bit of a challenge because like my work, like I was just saying, is so reliant on the live and the ability for me or the famous to like really play in the moment and read the audience and have this sort of back and forth with them. So I didn't find as much of that in Birmingham because I think I was still sort of settling into the show with all the little details, all the technical stuff, clipping into the harness, clipping out of the harness, am I going to forget this thing, you know, that kind of stuff. But I think it's always like that the first time you do a show. And then when we came to the Barbican, I had 2 weeks between to kind of like reflect, and I think I kind of found the like fire, the like rah behind it, and it's felt really great so far in the Barbican. I'm utterly exhausted, but so far I've seemed to find that spark
Yeah.
Somehow.
I'm not surprised. Your show really stretches you.
Oh my god, yeah.
Very physically.
And then we go to Reykjavik Dance Festival next week, and then we go to the Attenborough Centre in Brighton the week after. So we'll see how I survive.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
How long are you in Reykjavik for?
We've only got one show, so it's a festival setting.
Okay.
So that'll be great. And then there's only one show at ACCA as well. So I think after this run, I can kind of settle down a little bit and enjoy the traveling. And I've never done a sort of like a tour that's sort of compact like this. Like I've had shows that have toured sort of over 10 months, and we did like 10 venues, but not sort of quite like this. So it's intense.
Very hardcore.
Yeah, I suppose like a lot of people do this, but I've never done
new.
this. So
yeah, especially with the nature of your work.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could kind of give us a brief kind of rundown, or how do you describe Notorious? Also in terms of genre, because you incorporate a lot of different stuff into the show. But for our listeners who probably won't necessarily get to see it because it's sold out.
It's always like a return here and there, you never know.
Yeah, it's very true.
And come to Brighton, because that's not far.
Yeah,
please come to Brighton. Yeah. So from a content perspective, or a sort of conceptual perspective, the work for me is really just, there's been a lot of research going into it, but my tagline in my mind is sort of, it's about witches and bitches and whores and sluts and the mechanisms that require their punishment or redemption. That's what it is for me in short. And then in terms of genre, it is, I hope that it plays the genre. I mean, I come from a dance and choreography background. That's how I was trained, but obviously the work doesn't necessarily look like that anymore, perhaps. And then like the sort of history of performance art, live art, and body art are really my main influences for my practice. So like artists from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now that sort of really don't make work in theater contexts very often. So it's often more from the visual art world, actually. So people like Curly Schneeman and Hannah Wilkie and Vaginal Davis and Karen Finley and who else? So that kind of canon of female performance artists. And then, of course, I make work for theater spaces most of the time, probably all the time. And for me, it's really about politicizing that space and what belongs in that space and the way we look at bodies in that space. Coming from a dance background, you were always meant to, in some way, be the object to be looked at and enjoyed. And so my work is really like fervently rejecting that.
I really like how much your work is centered on the body and the body for women and being very feminist once it kind of becomes a spectacle. Do you feel like you work from the outside in when it comes to working with the body, or like the inside out? Like when you're devising or developing your work, do you look at it from an outside perspective, or does it come through? Is what I mean.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but I might interpret it in my own way.
Yeah, go ahead.
For me, it's sort of both at the same time. I think, the way we understand ourselves as women, as bodies, is so heavily impacted by the way we live in this world and the mechanisms that really delve into our psyche and become very tied in with the way we understand ourselves, and so they become very hard to split sometimes. And so for me, the work is sort of about, it comes in some sense from that overlap and from that problematic. So it does come from my own experiences in some sense. Like I feel this way about my body, or about how my body's being perceived. But as soon as I say the word perceived, that brings in the external. So I don't know, it is both for me at the same time. it's problematizing that interplay, actually, in a way that how much is there of that internal sense of our bodies and
and you really play with also the idea of performance as well. You use a lot of camera work and like live camera feed. Was that to kind of bring like another layer to the piece? And it obviously gets into angles that we can't see from a kind of traditional seating perspective in the theatre.
I think so. In this piece, I'm using the camera in a lot of ways to kind of reference the sort of confessional kind of trend.
Vlogging.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of like, I don't use that word. The kind of self-obsessed kind of like constant
selfie
sort of journaling.
Culture.
Selfie culture. The sort of journaling of a sort of falsity. A journaling of a persona rather than, I don't know what. But again, that confusion of like, I think this confusion, particularly among young women, about some version of themselves that's more internal or familiar to themselves, and the version that they're meant to be displaying. And social media, I think, really fucks with that in a scary way. Everybody's always on display. So it's sort of playing with that, in this show, among other things. But that was sort of the central role for this show, I think.
Yeah. And so you reference a lot of kind of like pop culture, current pop culture icons, I guess, kind of, I guess that feeds into the kind of notoriety of their image, and especially as kind of problematic white feminists or as women who get fetishized an awful lot. How did you kind of choose who to include? Because you reference Katy
that's
Perry.
a tough one, actually.
Sorry.
Well, because so I'm really not actually good in any way at keeping up to date with popular culture. I really like remove myself from it as much as I can. So I often feel like my references are like not relevant so much. The ones that come to me and that stick with me, like Miley Cyrus and the Sinead O'Connor kind of back and forth. I know it's sort of old now, but that really stuck with me as an interesting moment.
What happened there for our listeners who might not know?
Well, this is my version of it, because who knows. But what I recall is that Sinead O'Connor had written a letter publicly to Miley Cyrus, kind of basically saying, like, what I remember from it was kind of saying, you're basically a victim to this industry. They're taking advantage of you. And then Miley's sort of response being like, sort of, using this sort of post-feminist vocabulary of like, no, I'm empowered because I'm making these choices about my body. I'm choosing to display myself in this way. And just like, for me, they're both wrong and they're both right. And because Miley's right in one sense, in that, she's making these choices, but within the confines of very particular standards that are formed by misogynist and patriarchal structures. So, she thinks she's making her own choices, but they're quite limited. And to call her a victim is maybe not equally, but it is problematic as well, of course, because one, that gives all of this power to these patriarchal structures, and we can't really escape them completely, can we? So what do we do with them? We're always a victim to it in that sense, because we're always in it. So using the word victim is challenging. And I think it's also really easy to use the word victim to pathologize women who are no longer doing what you want them to do. If they're misbehaving. And while Miley was certainly behaving in the patriarchal sense, she was doing exactly what sort of we want her to do. She was also misbehaving for what Sinead O'Connor believed she should be doing, and she was also misbehaving in that she went from innocent to slutty, innocent to horny, and that's another kind of misbehaving that we fetishize, of course. But it's so easy to pathologize women for every choice we make. And so that, for me, is where the problem lies with Sinead O'Connor's argument, I suppose.
Yeah.
But anyway, this moment, I think, was... I just remember thinking about it a lot when it came out, and so Miley sort of became the sort of symbol of this problematic, of this question, and the way in which young women might read her as an empowered subject and how problematic that can be. And I think that applies to almost all pop stars and celebrities.
I'm going to just ask you about a word that you used, which was post-feminist.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, and do you try to avoid terms like empowerment or when it comes to your own work?
Yes. Yes, I do. So post-feminist, this is what my PhD was basically about. So
yes,
here we go.
Tell us, what was your, and you are a PhD holder.
Yes,
from Queen Mary University.
Dr. The Famous.
Yeah. What goes first? The famous
doctor. Always, yeah. So my PhD, I can never remember the exact title, but it was just sad. But it was looking at the political potential of negative affects, or like bad feelings, uncomfortable feelings, in relationship to contemporary feminism and performance, and the displayed female body in particular. So that's a lot of things. But we'll talk about the post-feminist side of that for a second. So, post-feminism. It's been defined as a rejection of second-wave feminism, which has been, I would say, publicly sort of like, what's the word? Just diminished to mean anti-men and anti-sex and victimizing feminism, which of course is in no way what second-wave feminism really was, but these are the things that have been taken out by mainstream culture and then sort of redistributed. So post-feminism, I think, is in one way a rejection of that, sort of a misguided rejection of second-wave feminism, and then it's also a sort of reclaiming of feminism on new grounds. However, those grounds for me are very problematic, and those grounds are often about kind of seeing pop culture and mainstream culture's appropriation of feminism as really useful, whereas for me, they're incredibly problematic. So often what happens is, so terms like empowerment, choice, etc., they become, and these were terms that were, of course, part of sort of the 70s rhetoric of feminism, they've become incorporated, and I mean that in both ways.
Yes.
Yeah. And appropriated and repackaged, exactly, and kind of branded, and then sold to women mostly as a way of buying products, and of participating in something that has lost all of its political ground, and sort of they come to mean just basically self-serving confidence and ambition, rather than anything that has anything to do with the political sort of context from which they come. And so oftentimes these sort of self-serving parameters of empowerment now, like just reinstate the problematics of patriarchy or misogyny. You can see this so clearly in this femvertising trend, which makes me nauseous. And it's everywhere. And it's also just in this contemporary moment of women claiming feminism again, which is both really useful and also quite scary, because the terms on which they're being claimed are superficial, are again about branding, without much backing it up.
It's very much divorced from those political roots.
Yes, exactly, and those political roots are unbelievably relevant today, and it gets, it's a little nerve-wracking when they become so divorced, as you say. I'm
also really interested in your idea of, you kind of reference and speak a lot about witchy, ritualistic world you set up, animosity in creatures, you have an octopus in your show, which I was very nervous about when I was
too.
watching all the trailers. I was very nervous. I was like, is he going to be in, or she? Is it going to be in the real show? Does it get scary that it's going to go flying? Or well, I mean, that's just one part.
Yeah.
But when I was watching it, I was like, is it going to hit?
Yeah. Maybe, I hope not, but maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, the animal quality. Yeah. Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with female sexuality and the way in which it is perceived, but also then silenced in so many ways. Like in this post-feminist world, sexuality looks like something very particular. It is very pretty, it is very polished, it is usually between a man and a woman, and if it's not, it's somehow repurposed. I don't know. I think, but I think that this brand of sexuality that is sort of advertised by sort of post-feminism is very clean and polished, and still very much about pleasing the man. And so when you have women like Beyonce or Miley or whomever claiming empowerment, and they're still displaying their bodies in a way that very much participates in misogynist and patriarchal like objectification and sort of standards of sexuality. Yeah, it's problematic. It's a question still. So what is sexuality outside of that for women? That's complicated. Perhaps this animal quality is sort of some part of that just sort of raw. It was really just about like playing into the repulsive and embodying something repulsive and just really enjoying that. Like the scene with the witch dance kind of thing with the hair and the gummy worms, and that one for me is like, it's so enjoyable because I just get to like lather up the repulsiveness. Yeah. It's just like I can just get into it. I can just hump things. And So it's both about like enjoying that animal quality and that repulsiveness and the rawness of it, but it's also about sort of playing into this perception of like, you know, the witch, the non-normative sexuality. Like, isn't this terrifying? Isn't this repulsive? Aren't you grossed out because I'm not a hot bitch trying to like be sexy for you? I don't know. That wasn't super clear. But there's something there maybe.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I really like the octopus.
Yeah, the octopus. For me, like, I have a lot of guilt about the octopus.
Yeah, of course.
I was veggie and vegan for 10 years. I'm no longer, but I love the octopus.
I am vegan.
Right. Oh, good. So I'm glad that you still like the scene.
But because I thought for anyone in the audience who was so repulsed by it, who, you know, isn't vegan or vegetarian, I was kind of like, you need to wake up to what it is that you're doing as well.
Yes, exactly. That's in my mind, that's worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And although I didn't like, you know, it's a very challenging thing to watch.
Yeah.
For the listeners, I'm not going to super give it away, but an octopus gets used in a way you wouldn't expect an octopus to get used.
Yeah.
And it becomes quite violent. But also, I think the amazing thing about your piece is that it kind of, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there that people will read into being shocking, but actually you play with time and like boredom, and at first you're shocked by, or you know, you think, oh, this is a shocking thing to see because I haven't seen it before, but actually what happens when it just keeps on going and it lingers and you're just watching it like, oh, this changed my whole opinion on how I felt right at the beginning.
You've just nailed like one of my main strategies, which
is
really? Like because the work is not about shock, of course, but and nor do I think shock is necessarily a bad thing. I think oftentimes it's because you're seeing something out of context and that throws you. That's not always a bad thing, is it?
Yeah.
But I think for me, it you know, the octopus isn't there for the shock of it. It's serving many other purposes, and so it is so much about giving it time and letting that image develop and that scene take its time so the audience can move beyond that initial moment of what the fuck, or oh my god, this is horrible, or what on earth is happening, to like having to deal with the image, to have to read it in various ways over a period of time, to give them the space to do that thinking, to do that work.
And I think that kind of part of your work also, I mean, I'm sure you probably get a lot of sensationalist extractions of ideas of your work.
Yeah.
But I feel like that you can't extrapolate particular images from your work in the same sense because you don't allow us to.
Right.
Which I thought was really powerful and yet part of the piece.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's very easy to sensationalize the work, but actually when you actually watch it, it's not so easy.
Yeah.
Because I tease you with something fetishizable or shocking or terrifying, but then I make you have to just deal with all of the complicated emotions that go along with that.
Like looking at your vagina was amazing.
Yeah, right.
Like how often do you do, how often do you have you're standing over a camera which is looking at you, and you insert all sorts of things, and it becomes, I think the vagina in many ways becomes quite violent, or
the
it becomes a
eyeball
weapon.
Scene you're talking about. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why I put the eyeball in it.
Yeah.
Because it's about the thing of looking back at you.
Yeah.
You've been looking at me for centuries, and I'm going to stare right back at you now.
Yeah. And allowing it to be seen and to,
yes.
and to stare as well.
Yeah, and because it goes then beyond the fetishizable, I believe, into...
I believe.
Into, I mean, maybe that's always present and threatening at the edges, this fetishizable quality, but I think because of the duration of it, it pushes beyond that. And I think you see, and you have to deal with your feelings of pleasure and disgust and boredom and... Curiosity, yeah. All of those things sort of together that complicate that image, rather than it being a flash of it, which can be very fetishizable.
Can I ask what it is? What's it made of?
The eyeball?
Chocolate?
Yeah. It's an egg.
It's an egg?
Yeah, it's an egg.
Yeah, we were trying to decide. We thought it would be an egg.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
That's the one. Yeah, that was one of the first images that I made for the show, actually, was the vagina eyeball, as I call it. Yeah. Just the uncanny quality of that image is kind of important for the work. Yeah.
Something that was really apparent when we saw it was that there seemed to be a lot of freedom and ad-libbing, especially like asides to the audience, like comments, the stories that were told.
Yeah, they're
Is
different.
it scripted, or how does it? Do you have prompts, or
bits of it are scripted and bits are completely not, and then bits have. Then there's some sections that have what did you just call it? Sort of landmarks. I don't know what word you just used, but these sort of markers to kind of hit to make sure that the work of the show is coming through,
right?
But that I can sort of improvise around all of that. So different scenes have different. Needs.
So the pizza story doesn't happen every night.
The pizza is one of her markers.
Okay.
So she has markers throughout, but then she sort of ad-libs it.
Yeah.
And then
there are other performers in this.
Yes. Let's talk about them, because they're amazing.
Yes.
So Krista Vladi and Brogan Davison. Krista is one of my closest friends. She's been working with me since I moved to this country 8 years ago. She's been in everything. And she also works for Frantic Assembly and for Upswing. She's a very experienced practitioner. And she's been part of this project from very early on. And this project has taken a very long time to complete because of the PhD. So she's been hugely involved in the making of this work, and I don't think she gets enough credit for that. So I'd like to make sure she really gets that credit. She's really contributed strongly to this piece. And then,
I mean, the piece would not be the same without those two.
Exactly.
They were so integral, I thought. I loved at the beginning, just when they were sat on the chair before you came in.
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful image, and just the way that they were so nonchalant and kind of preening themselves in these, really big wigs for our listeners.
Yeah, they are incredible performers. And then Brogan has a company in Iceland where she lives most of the time. She's living in Amsterdam right now, called Dance for Me, with her partner Peter Armanson, and they make incredible work. And we started collaborating a year ago after I saw her last premiere, Strip, and I just fell in love with the work and her as a performer, and we were like, should we do this together? And then we just did, and it was great.
Amazing.
Yeah, so they're both fantastic, and they're my sisters.
Yeah.
So they're my witch bitch sisters.
Yeah.
Couldn't do this without them.
How are you going to move forward without them? Or will you just keep them?
Yeah. Can I keep you? Yeah.
I love also talking about your kind of like directorial voice of the famous in it, when you kind of are directing them around the stage, and you're kind of being authoritative, you're also quite caring.
Yeah, exactly. They are my sisters, and behind the sort of fascism of the work, it is such a collaboration, and it is my work, and it is my research, but the process is, I believe, really democratic and just joyful to be together and thinking together. So we really wanted that sort of care and that sisterly quality to sort of be part of the show. So, like sisters, we love each other and we fight, and there's sort of part of that's just sort of in there.
Yeah.
And we really enjoy that part of it.
Yeah. Amazing. I could talk to you for so long. I love it. But we are going to have to wrap up.
Right.
So something we ask all of our guests is to recommend for our listeners some feminist faves. So that could be maybe scholars you've come across in your PhD, or fellow performance artists, dancers, politicians. It could be anyone you want to recommend.
Okay, so I'll start with scholars. At the moment, I'm obsessed with Sara Ahmed, who is a genius. Just read everything she's ever written. It's just, genius. For this work, I was really... What was I reading? The Promise of Happiness, I think it's called. We should check that before you use this, but just genius. And she talks about the feminist killjoy in a way that was just like, yes, be the feminist killjoy.
Is she a current writer? Or is this
yes, she's a current writer, Then Lauren Berlant is another one who I'm really into these days, current writer as well. And then artists. I don't know that I have like super contemporary like references, but I guess the ones that I would, I guess they are contemporary. What was I just thinking of? So Nao Bustamante. She's a genius. Nao Bustamante and Liv Young. Who's the other? Maria Lauribat is also always a big influence for me. And then always Julia Bardsley, Kira O'Reilly, Lois Weaver, and Split Britches, Peggy Shaw. Who am I missing? These people are like my mentors and my idols and my carers and my mothers and my sisters, and I really thrive from their presence in the world. Yeah.
It's a great collection.
Yeah. I'm sure there's more, and I'm going to forget somebody like super important, but...
No, they're brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us in this little cafe.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Bye.
Hello. We are here with Michelle Barwood. Would you like to introduce yourself, say a bit about what you do?
I'm Michelle Barwood. I am actor, occasional writer, not enough writing, and what was it? Bad feminist. Definitely a bad feminist.
And we welcome all feminists.
Yeah. And so we did a hashtag Bring a Feminist Friend with taking Michelle to see a couple of shows in the last week or two. It's a bit of a cheat because we normally try and do hashtag Bring a Feminist Friend with someone who's not an actor. But we've made an exception because you had such wonderful things to say about the plays that we went to see. I was like, we can't not get this on the podcast. Yes, so we're going to talk about them anyway.
Yay!
Also, you guys can fill me in because I unfortunately couldn't see either of the plays randomly.
No. Why was that, Pippa?
I've moved up to London!
Yay!
I don't know if I've ever mentioned, but I was living in Brighton before and I've just moved up to London. So we are currently recording in my new makeshift studio / bedroom. So yeah, now I'm here and we can see more stuff together.
Finally. Good. So while Pippa was in the midst of moving, I went with Michelle to see two plays. We went to see Queens of Sheba at Camden People's Theatre, our beloved Camden People's Theatre, that we can't stay away from. And we went to see an Event of Moone Disaster at Theatre 503.
Can I ask you a question, just before we properly start? Is it relevant that there's an E on the end of the moon in Moon Disaster?
Yes.
Okay.
Ooh.
Okay. You can
So
tell
the
me.
Moon is a family name. It's about a family whose surname is Moon.
Got it.
There you go.
And, like...
A generation of moons.
Okay. And it's also about space.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Give me a rundown. What were the plays about?
So yeah, that was about space travel.
Yeah.
About 3 generations of a family. One who... It started on the day... The play started on the day of the moon landing in the 60s, 1969, was it?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the characters is watching it on telly, and she gets really inspired and kind of has all these big ambitions about travelling and stuff. And then it's about her son and then his daughter, who, spoiler alert, goes to Mars.
Yeah.
Is like the first person on Mars, apparently. So the play kind of switches between the 3 different generations. Yes. And Queens of Sheba was about misogynoir, which is misogyny directed towards black women where race and gender both play roles in bias. That's the description of the play.
So with Queens of Sheba, was it multiple characters, or was it like one woman's? Because I'm guessing because it's Queens of Sheba, it was kind of following different stories. But what was the play centred on?
Different. I mean, it was different characters woven into different people, but again, they changed as well, didn't they? So there was this real sort of ensemble piece of. That was the great thing about it. All these, you knew that all the voices came from, you know, even if there was one person standing there saying it, that it came from multiple people. You got this sensation, and they changed between different characters. The 2 women, you know, they would play the parts of the men, which I thought was brilliant. These sort of caricatures. So yeah, it wasn't one different.
There's 4 actors.
Yeah.
And they all played loads of different characters.
Loads.
And I think all of the things they said, we saw the writer afterwards, and she said that all of the things that they said were based on things that real people had said.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know if it was exactly verbatim, but it was definitely like real life.
Taken from
theatre.
real life. Yeah, discussions and workshops that they'd done with people. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it was loads of different... It was all very, like, this is happening right now, this is very modern. Like, it was all different settings. Like, one was in a club, one was in a workplace. It was kind of little vignettes of daily life.
Yeah. And that was why I like, you know, the different variety of all these different... You go, oh, yes, and it's happened there, and it happens in this arena, and it happens in this arena.
Yeah.
And also all the different ways that it happens in the same place. Because, you know, in each place that they had, wasn't there? There was the 4 women... So their experiences varied in each of those arenas. So you really got that sense of not just one story, of all these different ways that people interact.
You definitely got the sense that the experience of misogynoir was different for every single individual woman, which I think was an important part of, like, not just saying this is what the problem looks like for everyone.
Yeah. Now I have to put my hands up. I've never even heard of that word, misogynoir.
Yeah. It's very... I think it's new.
It's
Do
quite
we know
a new word as far as I know.
Can I look up who came up with the phrase?
Yeah.
But it was good because it is that thing, if you hear it, you go, that's exactly what it is. Obviously, I know, obviously it's... but you kind of go, oh yeah. It's instead of me having to spend half an hour trying to explain to you what I mean, and then someone going, "Oh, I don't really believe that happened."
Yeah, you can be like, "Oh, there's an actual." It's like how like people start using the term like emotional labour and stuff like that. All these new terms are coming in that really underpin people's experiences in a particular way, but that you don't really have a vocabulary for.
And it's important. You know, it's important. You know, I think we sometimes argue against like labels and things, but actually it's important to give that kind of a name, and then I don't know, it just rings true straight away. You're not like you're not having to do that whole work of having to explain what you mean. It's like, okay,
doing the emotional labour. You don't
Again,
have to go into detail every time.
Yeah. And they go, well, what do you mean by?
Yeah. So it was coined by queer black feminist Moya Bailey, who created the term to address misogyny directed towards black women in American visual and popular culture.
Does it say when?
Bailey coined the term in 2010 when she was a graduate at Emory University. She first used it on the Kronk Feminist Collective blog to discuss misogyny directed towards black women in hip-hop music. Misogynoir combines misogyny and noir to describe anti-black sexism faced by black women.
I think there's like a definite thing of... That's good that we now know that, because I keep hearing so many stories of black women coining terms or introducing terms into popular culture and not being kind of credited for what that term like originally meant.
Like
so,
intersectionality.
Intersectionality, and also the woman who created On Fleek, she's now trying to like be recognised as the woman who's done that, and I think she was even trying to not necessarily monetize it, but she's trying to kind of like get royalties or something, or like I don't know, like some
get
kind
credit
of
for it.
there's some kind of
copyright.
recognition for it, because it kind of got taken and now it's kind of, you know,
it's almost like a patent for words, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
actually, you know, if I claim that, I should have the not just the recognition, but the actual value that's created financially.
yeah.
Yeah, if people are using it in advertising and things. Anyway, so back to Queens of Sheba, that kind of introduced a new audience to that phrase by putting it on stage.
What was the audience like? So it's at CPT.
Yeah.
So quite varied, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, very varied. And then we talked about it, didn't we? Saying how, you know, sort of as a mixed race person, you don't notice when you go into a theatre how many people of colour aren't there until you go into a theatre full of people that do look like you, who are there, and you go, oh, I haven't noticed this before. And I had the same experience at the Peacock Theatre. I'd gone to see something and I was like, wow, everyone's got their afros out and their hair out, and it's like this sea of wonderful hair, and I'm like, why don't I see that in the theatre? Why don't I see that in the theatre so often? But it's only when you're given the opposite, you kind of go, oh,
It was awesome.
yeah.
And the writer afterwards, so Jessica Hagan was the writer. It was brilliantly, superbly written, so I want to give her credit for that. But
Incredible.
she was saying to you afterwards how much she enjoyed watching your responses, because you were sat on the front row. We came in late, and not late, but like we were the last ones in the auditorium, so the front row was empty because no one wanted to be sat like basically on stage. So Michelle sat down on the front row and was just getting involved at every moment. It was amazing.
It was great, wasn't it? And then, you know, there was interaction with them as well, with the audience, you know, really directing their questions at you, and you're like, okay, like, 'cause it is such a small space as well. It's very intimate, and so that was really good.
But it was the perfect use of that space in terms of like creating almost a dialogue with the audience. Like, not really, because it wasn't like audience interaction, but there was definitely like an acknowledgement. The audience are there. This is for you. This is, you know, and paying attention to who was in the room.
To the point where there were audience members cheering and whooping and shouting at some point, which was incredible. You know, there was that one lady behind me, her arms are in the air, she's like going, yes! You know, that moment of going, that recognition moment of going, gosh, that's happened to me, or this is, I can't even, I wish I knew what it was.
Yeah.
Because it was a really good moment.
It kind of feels like, I don't know, like, oh, thank God. Like, you know, when I was reading the description of that, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, there's people are addressing it, and I haven't seen anything specifically say like we are addressing misogyny in our show at all.
And it didn't feel like it was a show that was aimed at sort of educating white people about what it was necessarily. It felt like we want to share this with everyone, but also like we want black women to come and see this show. That was the feeling in the room.
There was an element of joy, I think, is probably a good word. An element of joy about going to see it. Like you said, there's that recognition of going, oh my God, yay, and seeing this. But there wasn't that element of like, you know, trying to teach anyone, being too didactic. It was very much like, we're here, we're actually not, I hate the word celebrating, but that kind of going, we are going to show this, make fun of it, almost enjoy it, and take the power back from it. It felt like you kind of, by being there in that room with all those people, you're kind of going, oh yeah, and just taking the power back. I can't think of a better way.
There was that awesome moment. There was quite a few awesome moments where they sang, and it was beautiful. And then there was that moment where they went, black women keep rising and rising and rising, and it was like, it kind of felt like the audience were like rising up and being powerful. It was such a...
Is it British based as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really good.
Yeah.
They were all British, and it was like the experiences were very recognisable.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were still elements of referring to rap music and hip hop, which obviously is predominantly, you know, US based, but for the most part, it's. I think actually no, I say that. I think it was probably about. It was more about those comments were then how they're enacted in clubs and things
clubs.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it was settings of, like, I guess mainly young black women in the UK was the setting, and it was felt like those were the people that they talked to, and they got very authentic and specific experiences in those places.
We're probably going to have to move on to talking about Moone Disaster, but to kind of capture Queens of Sheba, is there a particular moment that was the most stand out to you?
Oh gosh, that's really difficult.
Well, I think the rising bit stood out to me.
I mean, the one thing that I did was, I mean, you know, like normally I'd post and tweet or whatever. I sent WhatsApp messages to all my black female friends going, you have to watch this. You really have to watch this. No, I'm telling you, you really, really, really have to watch this. Because again, it's that thing of it's not always. It sometimes happens in little brief conversations, but to see it so fully tackled and rounded and so beautifully embodied, all those things that you have in snatched of conversations.
It was like powerful and joyful, but it also didn't flinch away from any of the pain and kind of anger as well. Oh, also that moment on the way home fucking stands out for me.
Oh!
Yeah. Oh my god.
Was there a prick in the street or something?
Yeah.
There was, of course,
literally.
there was a prick in the street. Yeah.
We got off the tube at Brixton and we were waiting for the bus, and this guy just came up to us.
Oh, and
came up to Michelle.
What did he say first?
He said, "Where are you from?"
Oh gosh, yes, of course he did.
Straight away, because there was that bit in the show where they were like, "Where are you from?" No, "Where are you from?" And they kept bringing back that phrase. And then he came up to us and went, "Hey, beautiful lady," or something like, shit like that. "Where are you from?"
And then we just turned around and you're like, "Well, we're not asking where Beth's from." It's like, if you ask where Beth's from, and he's like, but that's the thing. It's like, well, actually, I'm English, mate.
Yeah,
like, I'm English. It's like, what do you want to do? And then obviously, like, well, they know my parents are this and Canadian, and it's like, actually, you've got the most modern interesting history.
I was like, sorry, why did you ask that question?
What did he say when you said that?
He said, "Oh, you're just so beautiful with your." I think he just immediately went to your hair and went, "I'm saying that because you look." I don't know what word he used, but
I can't even.
The implication was definitely like
the
exoticism.
That exotic
it was really
other.
Gross.
And then he did the hair grab. He genuinely, and I just grabbed his hand and went, "Are you really going to do this? Are you really going to do this?" I think he was Brazilian. Yeah, he's a Brazilian guy.
Because I was like, "Where are you from?" So I'm white. He was like, "No, I'm from Brazil," and I was like, "You should know better."
So, but that's the thing. We were just laughing, going, "This can't genuinely be happening."
The time.
Like, it was as though he was a plant.
It's like someone set him up. Someone set us up here, like to do this. It's like, yeah. So yeah,
there he was with the reality.
I can just imagine.
That did not happen after Moone Disaster.
No, it didn't happen after Moone Disaster.
And sadly, neither of us got to go in a spaceship after Moone Disaster, which would be like the equivalent, which was a bit
or like seeing a shooting star would have been nice, or something.
Yeah,
something
like
that. A nice, like one of those blood moons or something that really timed it well.
No,
unfortunately not.
It was a good play though, Moone Disaster.
Yeah.
So where was it on?
It was Theatre 503.
Cool.
Yeah. Good, great new writing pub theatre with a fairly new female artistic director, Lisa Sperling.
So this girl is going to Mars. What year was it that she was going to Mars? I'm like, is it?
So this is it. We talked about because we did sit there doing the maths.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
At the half time, because you can't help yourself when you've got like a generational thing. So obviously it was 69. Then the parents, the son of Moon, so I'm calling him Mr. Moon.
Mr. Moon.
They were 2017, so he would have been like an older father. We worked it out. He would have been an older father, and then it was 2050.
2049? Oh no, for 2055. Because I remember in my head I was comparing it, the future that was represented on stage in 2055 with the woman going to Mars. I was comparing to Blade Runner 2049.
Yes, that was it, yeah.
Which we both
I
watched.
see. 6 years apart. How different were they?
Yeah, really.
This was a good future.
Yeah, it was a positive future.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
women weren't sex objects and all that.
it was a positive future in terms of the woman being the first person on Mars. However, a lot of it was about how deeply entrenched, like even more so, capitalism, marketing, product placement was.
Yes.
Because like her journey to Mars
It was all being sponsored by certain products.
You know what that reminds me of? Have you seen The Truman Show?
Yes.
Film.
Yeah.
You know when it's like the fake world, and then she's just like sponsored by this like cleaning product or this, and you're just like,
Yeah.
There were those moments in there, weren't they, where she does this, and it's a really good thing that they did. Was it that they're doing like this interactive chat, and there's all this modern way of I'm doing the hand actions here, which means it's irrelevant.
It was very clever.
Podcast.
It was like rather than typing in an emoji, she just stuck her thumb up, and it was like the computer was sort of reading her, like turning her words into text and just reading her, doing a thumbs up and putting it into an emoji. So she was having like an online live chat, but rather than being sat at a laptop having an online live chat, she was doing it out loud and the computer was translating it onto Twitter.
How was the computer represented? Was it like a voice or
It was
like
a screen.
They had a screen at the back, which was great.
The set was really clever, actually.
Yeah, so it was great.
What did it look like?
White. Minimalist.
Or very 2001.
Yeah, kind of. But it was flexible enough that they could do whatever they wanted with it, but it still did transform the space, so it wasn't like a black box.
Yeah.
And it looked vaguely futuristic, but also vaguely 1960s.
Yeah, they've really got that right. You know, sort of sitting there with the TV, and you kind of, you know, in the 60s watching it, and then, you know, at the very end when they sort of changed the colouring of the screen, and it was just this very atmospheric, how you would imagine Mars, and it felt almost like claustrophobic, like you could almost imagine the gases and everything. Yeah, it was really good.
So was the ending, did you see her on Mars in the play, or was the ending like she stepped foot?
It was, I mean, there was a bit where there was like a simulation of her going to Mars, and you kind of thought that was her taking off.
Yeah.
And that was done with video, like
cool.
projection as well, which was really clever. So you were like, oh my god, she's doing it, and then she was like, something's going wrong. So it's really dramatic. This is full of spoilers, but basically I'm not sure if we actually saw her going to Mars, but you knew she was gonna go. Like, it was definite.
There's no question about whether she's going, and I suppose it's up to your own interpretation of that end piece of when you're not quite sure whether she's maybe about to step onto the spaceship or she's actually on the planet.
Yeah, or maybe doing like another simulation.
Yeah.
Because there was simulations. So the kind of, apart from it being directed by the new artistic director of 503, Lisa Sperling, that was kind of what drew me to going to see it. I heard that it was read by some sort of judging panel who didn't know who the writer was, and they all assumed, or not all assumed, but like there was some talk about whether the writer was a woman because of the strong female characters, because of the themes of the play, which were a lot of the play was about fertility.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it was written by a man,
Yeah.
but it was very concerned with women's attitude to their own fertility, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think, and then, because there was obviously different ways of viewing it, you know, that futuristic aspect of it as well, of how fertility's changed, you know, the younger one, the first Moon, you know, she gets pregnant, and obviously, you know, she's in the 60s, you know what life that then is going to lead to.
She got pregnant accidentally in the 60s,
yeah.
and then kind of has to sort of switch her life plans to just being a mother.
Just becoming a mother, and then there's that sort of 2017 crossroads of dilemma of them wanting kids, but actually her wanting a career.
And also, like, the 2017 couple was having difficulty conceiving
as well.
So they'd been through loads of IVF, and she was actually like, I kind of want to quit the IVF and
concentrate on my career. Yeah, and then you had the last Moon who switched it off or turned it on for a bit, wasn't it? It was something about her turning her fertility on.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
It was like digital womb thing where like she could choose whether she wanted to be fertile or just kind of switch it on and off.
That's cool.
Well, it felt a bit like my Marina Coyle which I don't know if I've mentioned on the podcast before, but it's very exciting.
Go on, tell
It's
us.
like a little plastic device that they've put in my womb that means I don't have any periods, and it stays there for 5 years, and it's contraceptive, and it just like hangs out there, and I'm like...
It's plastic?
Yeah.
Or
it's like got hormones, but like a tiny amount of hormones compared to the amount of hormones that are in the pill, and it releases them very, very gently over time and only localised without
affecting the rest.
Oh,
I didn't know it did that.
I want that. I don't want periods.
Yeah,
I didn't know
It's
that
so
it stopped
awesome.
period.
Well, for like 70-something% of women, they have no periods, and then a certain percentage of women have like less periods.
That's cool. Yeah. So we're getting there.
Check it out, people with wombs. Check it out if you're interested in not having periods. So, favourite things about Moon Disaster, obviously, women going to Mars.
There was a very... I did enjoy this very funny scene with the very funny sex scene, and it really sort of rolls reverse.
Was it awkward?
It was a guy turns up and she literally has a whole
2055
list,
futuristic sex scene.
futuristic sex scene, and she has a list of, well, you will do this and you will not do that, and blah, 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 and I expect this and I expect this, and why are you not undressed yet? Take your clothes off. I will not be doing that for you.
And then this man took his clothes off, and she was there in like her spacesuit.
Spacesuits.
Being like, this is what I want from you. I've like, I don't know what she'd like ordered him on a delivery service or something.
It felt like a Deliveroo.
Oh, I see. So there was like a kind of contract thing that she was saying,
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen.
I'm not sure exactly what the contract was, but yeah, she definitely like was in the power position. She was in control and getting what she wanted from this man sort of before she went to Mars, I guess.
Yeah, it was sort of a last bit of fun before she went off, but it was just quite a comical not reversal, but
it was I think it was a way of showing how gender politics had completely changed in this futuristic world, and it wasn't necessarily saying like, oh, she's like, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily furthering the plot with it.
No,
The scene didn't really kind of,
it didn't mean anything in terms of moving the plot on,
but it drove
was
the
quite
themes of the relationships between men and women and fertility and all of those things.
I quite like that because it reminds me of, I read an article that was about, what's that space film, Female Astronaut, that came out a few years ago? It's got like someone in it. It was Sandra Bullock. What's that film? Chloe, you can say what it is.
It's Gravity.
Gravity.
That's the one.
Oh God, I hated that movie.
Gravity. I read this article that was like, why is space so sexless? And it was basically, isn't there a guy there at some point?
Yeah.
There's a guy there, and they were talking about...
Is it George Clooney?
Yeah.
But he's a
Yeah, and they were like talking about like how many years that you're away, and like like they were kind of talking about like how is it that there was never any like hint of like their sex lives, like, or their sexuality while they were away.
Because
in
they're
space.
scientists, sexless
scientists.
scientists.
Scientists don't have sex or
Yeah,
periods
like,
or anything.
astronauts
No.
have sex, right? Like, or,
They must do.
You know, it's like it was. Yeah, it's interesting. But also, like, with this play, how is it that film so readily tackles space, but I don't think theatre does so much? Is it a money thing? Do you think?
Yeah.
I think it would be a money thing.
I mean, there is less sci-fi in space. There was a production at the Royal Court, that X, a few years ago that was set in space, and it got kind of mixed reviews, and it was a bit sort of, because I went in for the first half, it was very, very like, oh, it feels like we're in a genre, like a movie sci-fi genre, and I bought into that, and then towards the end of the play it started playing with text in a very kind of really sort of theatrical way, and it messed with the form, and you didn't know what was going on, and it was really confusing because I'd bought into it being like a film because it was sci-fi, and because the first half was very much like a sci-fi film, and this was kind of very much like a filmic sort of plot, and it could have been a film.
Yeah,
it wasn't necessarily.
I think it is probably quite hard to do because we have such an ingrained idea of space and the future in film sense,
and it being about special effects.
That's it. I was just thinking, because in order for you to believe that it's space, you have to have those concrete. They're obviously all green screen, but those concrete elements of like a space dashboard if you're in a spaceship or whatever. Those things, and if they don't quite ring true.
It's normally bigger budget stuff, I guess, that we're trying to tackle.
But I'm trying to think about. I mean, you made me think. Are there any bigger budget space?
The play wasn't really
theatre?
set in space. It was set around. It had the idea of space travel, like as a thing that was constantly referred to, and one of them was her job. And for the one in the 60s, it was like a kind of symbolic of having like sort of freedom and aspiration, and the things that kind of disappeared when she had a baby. So I guess it was kind of using space as like a symbol rather than exploring the actual
space, like
but isn't that what all the best sci-fi does? Is uses whatever the scientific future change is as like a way of exploring what life's like now.
Yeah.
The thing that I kind of think of, although it wasn't space at all, it was like string theory. But did you ever see Constellations?
No.
Royal Court play.
I read it.
Really good. Oh well, there you go. But it was like a two-hander acting out multiple realities. It was based on the idea of like string theory and like the tiniest action can lead to like you having an alternative life or like alternative dimensions. And stuff like that. And that was so simple in the set. It was like all these big like white balloons and then just two people on stage. But it was all through the performance that you were taken to all these through these different times. I mean, I guess that wasn't based in space, but like I don't know, I feel like I don't know, I feel like theatre needs to figure out its way of doing space a bit. Like I'm interested what that would be now.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. I mean, I think this did it really well. Like you said, it's that thing of not necessarily basing it there, but just that as a theme throughout. It's like, how do you get it? I think they did it really well. Sorry, I'm not very good.
They did it. It spoke to me and said that made me think about our world and our reality and our future a hell of a lot more than, sorry to bring it up again, Blade Runner, that came out, in the same week as this play, and was disgustingly sexist and didn't have anything kind of interesting or new to add to, like...
It was so backwards.
Yeah. It was so grim.
It was... I mean, I can't even think how I felt about the first one, but...
It was like all the bad things about our world amplified.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, no connection, humans not having any connection with each other. I mean, I guess it had these, like, what are they, replicants who aren't humans.
But the thing is also with, like, dystopian stuff like that, the aim of most dystopian stuff is to actually look for a better way, in the same way that when you have utopian futures or whatever, you're trying to look for the cracks of why it doesn't work, and obviously the dystopian is you're looking for hope. There was just nothing that you could glean from Blade Runner that was remotely redeemable, likeable, or like you said, it was just just reduced everything down. Where you think about
it was just
this
horrible.
play.
The women were like 90% of them were sex objects, apart from the woman who made Memories, who was literally in a bubble, separated from...
She was incarcerated. Yeah, exactly.
And then the Robin Wright's character, who was just like an evil boss. But they were all...
Got murdered anyway.
Yeah, and they were all stereotypes. They were all... Like, there was so many tits in it, I lost count.
I'm over
completely
it.
unnecessarily.
Like...
Sorry.
No,
sorry, I didn't mean to bring it back to that. But it was like, watching this play was such a relief.
Yeah, it really was.
After Blade Runner. It was like, had so much more to say, so much more.
Female director.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But male writer.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, I mean, like, thinking about those nitty-gritty implications of, like, what about fertility in the future? What about how that would work in the space program? How would you do that if it meant that you could go to the moon? Mars.
Yeah, and the reality of who is going to go up to Mars. They are going to have to really deal with those kinds of things.
Those questions,
it could be one of us.
Oh my God, wouldn't it be amazing if we got one of those women on the podcast?
I read
a BuzzFeed article, and it was like interviewing the women who were in the Mars, I forgot what it's called, but like the Mars 20 or whatever,
oh my God.
Mars 50 scheme, and they were all saying like, I've just always had an interest in, like, but they were like super normal women. I don't know what I expect, but they just were, and I was like, where is this so weird?
They might be gone.
But that's it. It's like, where does that impulse come from? I find that fascinating. I've talked about some of this before, of exploring that idea, because we're saying about if you're going to Mars, you're going to Mars and you're not coming back. That's a real
It's a commitment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a commitment.
Yeah, just a little bit.
It's like getting a dog.
Or a rabbit. Michelle's
Yeah.
just got a rabbit. Did I mention that?
Yes, I got my new pet rabbit.
What
I mean,
are
that
they
was very
called?
little. Put him.
What are they called, your rabbit?
My rabbit is called Benji.
Benji.
But I got him from a lady that's travelling, so she'd already named him, which is a bit, I mean, not annoying, but my first rabbit was called Ben, so now I've got Benji. Oh, it's a different character.
I mean, Benjamin Bunny, it's kind of a rabbit
exactly.
name,
You kind of, there's only probably a handful. I did think about calling him like Graham. But Graham the rabbit.
Interesting. He's probably relieved to be called Benji still. Yeah. I need to go in a minute, so we need to get your feminist faves on.
Feminist
Hashtag
faves.
feminist faves. Who do you recommend for the listeners?
Oh gosh. Well, I was thinking of people that I follow and admire. And it's a bit of an old school one. I was thinking of Eve Ensler. Because obviously I know we've got the vagina monologues, which I personally don't like.
Mm-hmm.
But actually in terms of what she's doing at the moment, and something we talked about how do we communicate feminist things in feminist ways, as in not aping men, not aping male ways of doing things. And she has this project called 1 Billion Rising.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah.
Amazing. It's about dance. They did this big thing in I can't, it's really bad, I go Africa, like there's just, you know, I'm going to show myself up here, I can't remember where it was, but they did this whole thing where the women didn't march, the women danced. And maybe it goes back to that Queen of Sheba thing of actually finding the joy and finding the fun and finding that rise. I mean, it's called Rise, 1 billion rising, and she's referring to the rising number of women that are abused and sexually, emotionally abused. Obviously it's like 3 billion women and 1 in 3, so it's 1 billion and rising. But then she also talks about rising as in women rising up, and the projects she does are fantastic. So
that reminds me of Rash Dash 2-man show. Did you see that?
No.
That part of that is about the kind of history of the patriarchy and how we can talk about the patriarchy and misogyny and masculinity and all of those things without aping the sort of like patriarchy itself and using patriarchal forms. And so they end up in that show doing a lot of kind of physical stuff like dance, movement, music that's not text based and it's not like plot, kind of like in a standard plot,
not so linear and not so structured. I think that's it. That seems to be the theme of, like, it's not so structured. But yeah, no, I find it really interesting, you know, following her and actually trying to do some of the events. Or she does yearly events on Valentine's Day. They do a celebration of the vagina monologues, but you can do other things if you want to do. So you can actually get the text and do your version of vagina monologues, raise the money for it, or you can do other projects related to 1 Billion Rising, which so far I haven't got around to doing, but
Cool.
1 year. So
That's
she's my lady.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent nomination. Thank you for talking to us, Michelle, and coming, being a great theatre companion.
Thank you. Here's more.
Yes, please, definitely. Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you so much to Lauren and Michelle for being part of what was a really great episode. So coming up, we have some shows that we want to recommend to you. First up is Jubilee, which is at the Manchester Royal Exchange until November. And then from next year, it will actually be coming to the Lyric Hammersmith in Feb. It centres around a marauding girl gang on a killing spree and a time-travelling queen, Elizabeth I. It's a story of what happens when creativity and nihilism collide, featuring a soundtrack to die horribly for, and with a cast led by one of the film's original cast members, it's based on the film, legendary punk warrior Toya Wilcox. Jubilee is a free-spirited, gloriously rude, take-no-prisoners blast of a show for young punks, old punks, and anyone who's ever wanted to set the world on fire. So that one looks great. Also, there is Damsel Develops at the Bunker from November the 13th to the 19th, which is an eclectic week-long festival of work by emerging female directors, including rehearsed and staged readings, feedback sessions, excerpts of new work, and some live music. If you're someone who enjoys being exposed to the creative process and being introduced to emerging female artists, then you'll love Damsel Develops. So that's a little festival. Also, we have the Butch Monologues, which is coming to Soho Theatre from November the 21st to the 24th. The Butch Monologues is a powerful and often humorous collection of secret stories exploring sexuality, vulnerability, and desire, taken from interviews with butchers, masculine women, and trans men living worldwide. It is developed and performed by The Drakes, a London-based group of butchers, trans men, and gender rebels brought together in friendship and solidarity. So that looks really great. I'm really looking forward to that one. We also have We Are the Lions, Mr. Manager, which is at Tara Theatre from Tuesday the 21st to the 25th of November. So it's kind of the same time as the Butch Monologue, so you can see them both in the same week. Very different productions, though. This is touring until May, which will be coming to the Brighton Festival, but it's in London at the Tara Theatre, 21st to 25th. It is a new play by Townsend Theatre Productions, which relives the extraordinary true story of the Granwick strike, led by a woman called Giabine Desai. I hadn't heard of this story before until I heard of this play. And it's an incredible story of this woman who was an Indian immigrant working in the factories in East London. And she resigned after being ordered to work overtime, and she, amongst many other immigrant women in the factory, instigated a strike, protesting about working conditions, about pay inequality, the institutionalised racism that was shown within the company. It was a huge part of the British trade union movement that I had no idea about. And it sounds like an amazing play, which focuses on that story. So that will be on at Tara Theatre. It's called We Are the Lions, Mr. Manager. Back to Soho Theatre, however, in December, so jumping a bit forward, we have Pecs, who I think we've mentioned before. They are a drag king collective, and they had a sellout run earlier this year, so they're making their Soho Theatre debut with their smash hit 80s Cabaret. So the description says, packed with power suits, Prince tribute acts, and new romantic pretty boys, this show sticks it to the man and doesn't hold back. Join the all-singing, all-dancing Drag King Collective as they bring our beloved queer icons back to life and get us ready to fight the power. Me and Beth actually have tickets to this one. I can't remember what night we're going. I think it's a Friday or Saturday. We've seen Pecs before. They're absolutely brilliant. I love them so much. They were probably like my first really big introduction to drag kings, especially Temmie, who is Drag King Cole. So I would tell you to get your tickets for that one because it's booking up fast. And also a play that's coming to the Royal Court, which is called Bad Roads, which is from Wednesday the 15th of November to Saturday the 23rd of December. In the darkest recess of Ukraine, a war is raging. A journalist takes a research trip to the front line. Teenage girls wait for soldiers on benches. A medic mourns her lover killed in action. Heartbreaking, powerful, and bitterly comic accounts of what it is to be a woman in wartime. So that one sounds really interesting as well. So those are our roundup of theatre recommendations. If you see any other plays, please tweet us at Bechdel Theatre. If you do a hashtag Bring a Feminist Friend challenge, let us know. Record it, tweet us, send it to us. Or if you yourself want to come and be on our podcast, then let us know. But until next month, that is us. Thank you, everyone.